I watched my stepmother hand Clarissa a check for $5,000, my prom dress budget, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You deserve something special, sweetheart, Patricia cooed, tucking a strand of Clarissa's glossy black hair behind her ear. Senior prom only happens once. My stepsister squealed, already pulling up designer boutique websites on her phone. Neither of them glanced at me standing in the doorway. They never did. In my first life, this moment had destroyed me. I'd begged, cried, and pleaded. I'd worked 3 part-time jobs to scrape together $200 for a clearance rack dress that made me look like a shabby afterthought next to Clarissa's custom Marquesa gown. But that was before I died at 23 in a car accident caused by Clarissa's drunk driving, before I woke up on my 16th birthday with 4 years of memories burning in my mind like prophecy. This time, I smiled and turned away. Where are you going? Patricia's voice stopped me, sharp as glass. Aren't you going to thank your sister for being so understanding? She graciously agreed to let you borrow one of her old dresses. Clarissa looked up from her phone, lips curved in that practiced sympathy that never reached her eyes. The blue one from sophomore year should fit you. It's a little outdated, but beggars can't be choosers, right? In my previous life, I'd accepted that dress with gratitude. I'd alterned it myself, spent hours trying to make it less obviously secondhand. I'd still looked like Cinderella before the fairy godmother, all wrong next to my stepsister's magazine-worthy appearance. That's very generous, I said evenly, but I'll make my own. Patricia's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Make your own? Vivian, you can barely sew a straight line. Don't embarrass yourself or us. I met her eyes for just a moment, letting her see something that made her smile falter. Then I walked away, already calculating. I had 4 weeks until prom. 4 weeks to execute the first phase of a revenge that had been simmering in my reborn mind for months. Because I'd learned something crucial in those 4 years before my death. My real father, the one who'd died when I was 2, the one Patricia always dismissed as a struggling artist, had been Leonardo Chen, only son of the Chen dynasty that controlled half the luxury fashion industry in Asia. My grandmother had been searching for me for 21 years. The betrayal had started long before the prom dress budget, long before Patricia married my father when I was 6 and brought Clarissa into our home like a parasitic twin. I was 8 when I first noticed Patricia going through my mother's jewelry box, pocketing pieces and replacing them with cheap replicas. I was 10 when I realized the college fund my maternal grandparents had set up was being slowly drained, diverted to Clarissa's writing lessons and pageant fees and private tutoring. I was 12 when my father, my weak, conflict-avoidant father, started forgetting my birthday, but never Clarissa's. When he'd look through me at dinner but light up when my stepsister spoke. By 14, I was invisible in my own home. I did all the cleaning, all the cooking, while Clarissa was driven to auditions and networking events. I shopped at thrift stores while she had a walk-in closet full of designer labels. I was expected to be grateful for hand-me-downs and lectured about being too sensitive whenever I complained. In my first life, I'd endured it all with the desperate hope that if I was good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, they would finally love me. I'd accepted every humiliation. I'd believed their narrative that I was lucky they kept me around at all. Then came the prom dress incident, followed by Patricia convincing my father to refuse to pay for my college, followed by years of struggling through community college and part-time jobs, while Clarissa attended Princeton on the funds that should have been mine. The final insult came when I was 23, working 2 jobs to pay for Clarissa's destination bachelorette party because family helps family. She'd gotten drunk, insisted on driving, and wrapped her Mercedes around a telephone pole. She walked away with a scratch. I died on impact. When I opened my eyes again, I was 16, staring at my bedroom ceiling, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The first step had been research. In my previous life, I'd never questioned Patricia's story about my father being a nobody, never wondered why there were no photos of him, no relatives who visited, no paper trail beyond a death certificate. This time, I dug deeper. I spent months after my rebirth sneaking into Patricia's office, photographing documents, searching through boxes in the attic. I found what she'd hidden: letters from lawyers in Hong Kong, private investigator reports, cease and desist orders attempting to prevent my grandmother from finding me. My father, my real father, had been estranged from his wealthy family when he fell in love with my mother, an American college student. They'd married despite his mother's disapproval, and he'd refused to return to Hong Kong even when his father died and left him a fortune. He died in a studio fire when I was 2, and my mother died of cancer 3 years later. My grandmother had tried to find me then, but Patricia, who had been my mother's nurse and wormed her way into becoming my guardian, had moved us across the country and changed our names slightly. She'd forged documents, bribed officials, created a paper trail that led nowhere. She'd stolen my inheritance, my identity, and my family. In the days after the prom dress incident, I started my plan in earnest. I'd learned in my first life that I had a natural talent for design. I'd taken a few community college classes and discovered I could sketch, drape, and construct garments with an intuitive understanding that my instructors called genius. In this life, I'd been developing that skill in secret for months, watching online tutorials, practicing on thrift store finds, teaching myself everything from pattern drafting to haute couture techniques. Now I needed 2 things: materials and exposure. Materials were easy. Patricia thought I was working after school at a coffee shop. I was actually working at a high-end fabric store where the owner, an elderly seamstress named Ms. Park, had taken me under her wing. She'd let me buy bolt ends and damaged goods at cost, had taught me professional finishing techniques, had shown me where to source vintage buttons and specialty threads. In my first life, I'd never known this kindness existed. This time, I hoarded it like treasure. Exposure was trickier. I needed the prom to be more than just a high school dance. I needed it to be a statement, a debut, a moment so spectacular that it would start ripples I could ride to my ultimate goal. So I made some calls. "Westfield Preparatory Academy," the receptionist answered. "Hi, this is Vivian Chen calling about the senior prom. I'd like to arrange for my grandmother, Helena Chen, to sponsor the event's professional photography and live stream." The receptionist's gasp was audible. Helena Chen was fashion royalty, a name that appeared in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, whose opinion could make or break careers. The school would never refuse her sponsorship. They didn't need to know I hadn't actually contacted my grandmother yet. That was phase 2. I spent every free moment over the next 3 weeks in Mrs. Park's workroom, constructing my dress. I'd designed it in my mind 1,000 times during those long, bitter years of my first life. A modern qipao that honored my Chinese heritage, with a structured silk bodice embroidered with phoenix feathers and gold thread, a full skirt of layered crimson organza that moved like flame, and a train that could be bustled for dancing. Every stitch was perfect. Every bead was placed with precision. I worked until my fingers bled, fueled by 4 years of rage compressed into 4 weeks of creation. Mrs. Park watched me work with knowing eyes. "You sew like someone who has something to prove," she said one night, as I attached the final crystal to the bodice. "I do," I admitted. "I'm proving I exist." She squeezed my shoulder. "Then make them unable to look away." At home, I played my role perfectly. I wore Clarissa's cast-off blue dress to dinner, letting Patricia and my father see me in it, nodding when they said it looked acceptable. I listened to Clarissa's endless monologues about her custom Versace gown, champagne silk, hand-beaded with a price tag that made my father wince but pay anyway. "James Mitchell asked me to prom," Clarissa announced one night, tossing her hair. "He's taking me in his father's Bentley. We're going to look like celebrities." James Mitchell. In my first life, he'd been my date, or rather, I'd asked him desperately after being rejected by 6 other boys who'd been discouraged from accepting me by Clarissa's Whisper campaign. He'd said yes out of pity, spent the whole night comparing me unfavorably to my stepsister, then dumped me at the after-party to pursue her. This time, I'd never asked him. I had other plans. "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. Everything was falling into place. 3 days before prom, I made contact. The Hong Kong law firm that managed my grandmother's estate had a New York office. I walked in with every document I'd stolen from Patricia's files, every piece of evidence of my true identity, and asked to speak with someone about Helena Chen's missing granddaughter. The junior associate who met with me clearly thought I was delusional until she started examining the papers. Her hands began to shake. "Stay here," she said, and disappeared. 20 minutes later, I was on a video call with a woman whose face was my father's face, my face rendered an elegant age. She had the same sharp cheekbones, the same intense dark eyes, the same way of tilting her head when studying something carefully. "Vivian," she breathed, and I watched 21 years of grief crack across her features. My granddaughter. I should have cried. In my first life, I would have. But I'd already grieved in the 4 years before my death. Grieved for the family I'd never known. The life I'd been robbed of. Now I had only clarity. "Grandmother," I said, and her eyes filled with tears at the word, "I have a favor to ask." I told her everything, not about the rebirth, that would sound insane, but about Patricia's theft, the forged documents, the stolen inheritance, about the years of abuse and neglect, the systematic erasure of my identity. "And prom?" she asked when I got to my request. "You want me to attend your high school prom?" "I want you to judge the best-dressed competition," I said. "And I want you to meet me, really meet me, before we expose what Patricia has done. I want her to see me win first. I want her to understand what she tried to destroy." My grandmother's smile was sharp as a blade. "You are definitely your father's daughter." He had this same sense of dramatic justice. Her expression softened. "What are you wearing?" "Something I made myself. Something that honors our family." "Then I will be there," she said. "And Vivian, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." Prom night arrived like a thunderstorm building on the horizon. You could feel the electricity in the air, the pressure of something about to break. I got ready alone in my room while Patricia and Clarissa commandeered the master bathroom for her 3-hour transformation. I could hear them laughing, chattering, the sound of happiness I'd never been invited to share. I didn't care. I had stopped caring the moment I woke up with 4 years of future memories burning in my mind. My dress hung on the back of my closet. Door, a crimson flame that seemed to glow in the dim light. I'd brought it home piece by piece, hidden in shopping bags from my supposed coffee shop job, assembling it like a secret weapon. I did my makeup carefully, dramatic red lips, sharp winged eyeliner, my hair swept up in an elegant chignon with antique jade pins I'd bought with my first paycheck. When I slipped into the dress, zipping up the side and arranging the train, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I looked powerful. I looked expensive. I looked like someone who could trace her lineage back through centuries of Chinese nobility and modern fashion empire building. I looked like someone who could not be ignored. The doorbell rang downstairs, James Mitchell arriving to pick up Clarissa. I heard the commotion, Patricia's delighted squeals, my father's gruff approval. The photographer Patricia had hired would be taking pictures in the foyer. I waited. Timing was everything. 10 minutes later, when I knew they'd be finishing up, I descended the stairs. The reaction was everything I dreamed of in my first life and planned for in this one. Patricia's mouth fell open. My father's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. James Mitchell, posing with Clarissa in her admittedly stunning champagne Versace, turned and forgot to close his mouth. But it was Clarissa's face that I savored. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning fury as she realized I wasn't wearing her cast-off blue dress. "What are you wearing?" Patricia found her voice first, shrill with panic. "My prom dress," I said calmly, gliding down the stairs with my train rustling behind me like dragon scales. "Did you think I was joking when I said I'd make my own?" That's," Patricia sputtered. "That's a designer dress. Where did you get the money?" "I made it," I said simply. "Every stitch, every bead, every inch of embroidery." The lie detector test of their expressions was perfect. They didn't believe me, couldn't believe me, because they'd spent so many years convincing themselves I was worthless. "You're wearing that to prom?" Clarissa's voice dripped with venom. "You're going to embarrass yourself. That looks like something from a costume shop." "Does it?" I tilted my head, letting the light catch the gold thread, the crystal beading, the hand-stitched details that had taken weeks to perfect. I suppose we'll see what the judges think. Judges? Patricia's face went pale. For the best-dressed competition, didn't you hear? We have a special guest judge this year. Someone very prestigious in the fashion world. I smiled. I should get going. My date will be here soon. Your date? Clarissa laughed shrilly. Who would possibly... The doorbell rang again. I opened it myself and had the pleasure of watching my family's faces as David Park, Mrs. Park's grandson, a senior at our rival school and a 6'3" Korean-American model who'd been featured in GQ last month, stepped into the foyer in a custom tuxedo with crimson accents that perfectly complemented my dress. You look breathtaking, David said, offering his arm. We'd choreographed this moment carefully, practiced it until it looked effortlessly natural. Thank you, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Shall we? Patricia made a strangled sound. My father just stared. Clarissa's carefully made-up face was a mask of rage. James Mitchell looked at Clarissa's Versace, then at my creation, and I saw him doing calculations he didn't have the depth to understand. Have a wonderful evening, I said sweetly, and let David escort me out to the vintage Rolls-Royce his grandmother had rented for the occasion. Another carefully planned detail designed to make a statement. As we pulled away, I allowed myself one small smile of triumph. The evening was just beginning. Westfield Preparatory's prom was being held at the Ashford Estate, a historic mansion with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. In my first life, I'd been so nervous I'd barely eaten. Too aware of my cheap dress and cheaper date, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. This time, I made an entrance. The live stream Patricia's receptionist had mentioned was already running, cameras positioned at the entrance to capture arrivals. A red carpet, an actual red carpet, had been rolled out with step and repeat banners featuring the school crest and, prominently, the Chen Dynasty Couture logo. My grandmother had not done anything halfway. David and I paused at the top of the steps, perfectly framed by the mansion's entrance. I could hear the whispers starting, the rustle of recognition and confusion. Who is that? Is that Vivian Sterling? It can't be. That dress is incredible. Wait, is that David Park, the model? We descended slowly, giving the cameras time to capture every angle. My train flowed behind me like liquid fire. The phoenix embroidery caught the light and seemed to move, alive with gold flame. Inside the ballroom, the transformation was complete. This wasn't just a high school prom anymore. Professional photographers circulated among the students. A stage had been set up at the far end, with a judge's table draped in red silk. And seated at that table, elegant in a black kipayo that was clearly vintage couture, was my grandmother. She caught my eye across the room and smiled, a small, knowing curve of lips that promised everything. Clarissa and James arrived moments later, and I watched my stepsister's face as she took in the setup, the cameras, the professional atmosphere. She'd expected to be the star of this evening, the unquestioned queen of senior prom. She was about to learn what it felt like to be outshined. The first hour of the dance passed in a blur of whispered conversations and pointed stares. Everyone wanted to know where I'd gotten my dress, who had designed it, how I'd transformed from invisible nobody to this vision in red and gold. I deflected, with vague smiles, and turned the conversation to other things. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Clarissa held court in her corner, surrounded by her usual coterie of admirers, but I could see her attention constantly drawn to me, to the way people kept glancing over, comparing. Then the announcement came. Ladies and gentlemen, the principal's voice boomed over the sound system. We have a very special guest tonight. Helena Chen, founder and creative director of Chen Dynasty Couture, has graciously agreed to judge our best-dressed competition and award a special scholarship for emerging design talent. The room erupted in excited whispers. Helena Chen was a legend. Her opinion could launch careers. Her approval was worth more than any prize money. I watched Clarissa's face light up with greedy excitement. She thought she still had a chance, thought her expensive designer gown would impress. She had no idea. I'd like to invite all participants to join me on stage, my grandmother said, her accented English carrying perfectly through the microphone. I want to see each look up close, understand the choices behind each ensemble. There was a surge toward the stage. Clarissa practically sprinted, dragging James with her, determined to be first in line. I waited. Let her have her moment of hope. 20 students lined up, showing off everything from designer labels to vintage finds to creative thrift store reconstructions. My grandmother moved down the line slowly, asking questions, examining construction, occasionally requesting someone to turn around so she could see the back of a garment. She was professional with everyone, complimentary but not effusive, pointing out strong choices and interesting details without committing to judgment. Then she reached Clarissa. Versace, my grandmother said, studying the champagne silk. Spring collection, if I'm not mistaken. Retail price approximately $8,000. Clarissa preened. My mother knows fashion. Only the best. And did you select this yourself? Of course. I knew exactly what would look perfect on me. My grandmother's expression didn't change, but I could read the disdain in the way her eyes moved over the dress, appreciating the designer's work but dismissing the wearer's contribution. It's a beautiful dress, she said finally, on a beautiful girl. But tell me, what does it say about you? What story does it tell? Clarissa blinked, clearly confused by the question. It says I have taste and style? It says you have money, my grandmother corrected gently, which is not the same thing. The dismissal was subtle enough that Clarissa didn't fully register it, but I saw her smile falter, saw the first crack in her confidence. Then my grandmother moved to me. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. She circled me slowly, examining every detail of my dress, the phoenix embroidery, the hand beating, the construction of the bodice, the way the skirt moved when I turned. Her face remained impassive, but her eyes were alive with something I couldn't quite name. Tell me about this dress, she said finally. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed my answer 100 times, but standing there under her scrutiny, under the weight of everyone's attention, I found myself speaking from the heart instead. It's a modern qipao, I said, inspired by my heritage, my Chinese heritage that I've only recently begun to truly understand. The phoenix represents rebirth and transformation. The red symbolizes joy and good fortune, and every stitch was sewn by my own hands, every bead placed with intention because I wanted to create something that honored where I came from and proved what I could become. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. My grandmother's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. And how long did it take you to construct this piece? 3 weeks. I worked every day after school and on weekends. You designed it yourself? Yes, ma'am. The embroidery? By hand. It took 40 hours for the phoenix alone. She reached out and touched the fabric, rubbing it between expert fingers. The silk is du peony. Where did you source it? I work at a fabric store. The owner let me buy bolt ends at cost. And you did all of this? Designed, patterned, constructed, and finished this couture-level garment in 3 weeks while attending high school with no formal training? I met her eyes. Yes. The moment stretched between us, loaded with everything we couldn't say here, with all the years of separation and the future we were about to reclaim. Then my grandmother smiled, not the polite professional smile she'd given the others, but a real smile that transformed her face. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, turning to address the room without releasing my gaze. I have been in the fashion industry for 45 years. I have dressed royalty, celebrities, and world leaders. I have seen thousands of designs, worn hundreds of couture pieces, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what I am looking at right now is genius. The ballroom erupted. This young woman, my grandmother continued, her voice cutting through the noise, has created something that most designers with decades of experience would struggle to execute. The technical skill is flawless. The artistic vision is sophisticated. But more than that, this dress tells a story. It has soul. It has meaning beyond mere aesthetics. I could feel Clarissa's rage from across the stage, could see Patricia standing near the back of the room with her face gone ashen. The winner of tonight's best-dressed competition, my grandmother announced, and the recipient of a full scholarship to Parsons School of Design with an additional internship at Chen Dynasty Couture in Hong Kong is Vivian Chen. The room exploded with applause. Students surged toward the stage, everyone wanting to get closer, to take pictures, to congratulate me. But I only had eyes for my grandmother, who stepped forward and pulled me into an embrace that felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. "My granddaughter," she whispered in my ear, too soft for the microphones to catch. "My beautiful, talented granddaughter. I have found you at last." Behind her, I could see Clarissa's face, shock and rage and disbelief warring for dominance. I could see Patricia pushing through the crowd, probably trying to reach me, to stake some claim, to control the narrative before it spiraled beyond her grasp. Too late. It was already too late. "There's something you should know," I whispered back to my grandmother, "about how I ended up with my stepmother, about what she's done." "I know," she said, pulling back to look at me with eyes that held steel beneath their warmth. "The lawyers have been investigating since you contacted us. We know everything. The forged documents, the stolen inheritance, the identity theft, everything. And," her smile was sharp as a knife, "and now we destroy her." The rest of prom passed in a surreal haze. I danced with David, accepted congratulations from classmates who'd never spoken to me before, posed for hundreds of photos. My grandmother held court at the judges' table, but her eyes never strayed far from me, as if she was afraid I might disappear if she looked away. Clarissa left early, dragging a confused James Mitchell with her. Patricia tried to approach me 3 times, but was expertly blocked by security guards my grandmother had brought, large professional men in dark suits who appeared whenever she got close. Around midnight, as the dance was winding down, my grandmother stood and gestured for me to join her on stage one more time. "I have one more announcement," she said to the remaining students. "I would like to formally introduce you all to my granddaughter, Vivian Chen, daughter of my late son, Leonardo Chen, and heir to the Chen dynasty." The gasps were audible even over the music. "Some of you may know her as Vivian Sterling," my grandmother continued, and I saw understanding dawn on faces throughout the crowd. That name was given to her by her guardian after her parents' deaths, but her true identity was stolen from her, hidden deliberately by people who wanted to keep her from her family and her inheritance. Patricia, still hovering near the exit, went white as bone. "As of tonight," my grandmother said, "legal proceedings have begun to restore Vivian's true identity, return her stolen inheritance, and prosecute those responsible for identity theft and fraud. I wanted you all to witness this moment, to see my granddaughter reclaim her name and her future." She turned to me, and in her hands was a small box of crimson silk. "This was your father's," she said, opening it to reveal a jade pendant carved in the shape of a phoenix. "He wore it every day until he died. I want you to have it now as a symbol of your rebirth into your true life." I let her fasten it around my neck, felt the weight of it settle against my chest, cool and smooth and somehow right. "Welcome home, Vivian Chen," my grandmother said, and the room erupted in applause once more. I didn't go back to Patricia's house that night. My grandmother had booked a suite at the Ashford Estates Hotel, and I stayed there, sleeping in luxury I'd never known while lawyers worked through the night to file emergency custody papers and restraining orders. When I woke the next morning, my grandmother was already up, sitting in the suite's living room with a team of lawyers and a stack of documents 6 inches thick. "Good morning, dear," she said, as if midnight coups were perfectly normal breakfast conversation. "I thought you'd like to be here while we discuss the proceedings." I poured myself coffee and sat down, still wearing the silk robe the hotel had provided, my hair loose around my shoulders. Through the window, I could see the grounds where last night's triumph had unfolded. The head lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen, no relation, apparently it was a common name, walked me through everything they'd uncovered. Patricia had stolen more than just my identity. She'd forged my mother's will, naming herself guardian and executor. She'd emptied my maternal grandparents' college fund, nearly $200,000. She'd sold family heirlooms, canceled life insurance policies, and redirected my father's modest assets into accounts under her control. The fraud totaled over $3 million once my paternal inheritance was factored in. "We have documentation for everything," Margaret said. "Bank transfers, forged signatures, falsified death certificates." She was meticulous about covering her tracks, but not meticulous enough. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we file criminal charges: identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery. She's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." Margaret's smile was cold. "And that's before we add in the civil suits for emotional damages and punitive compensation." "And my father, her husband?" "He's complicit. He signed documents, authorized transfers. At minimum, he's an accessory. At worst, he was a full partner in the fraud." I should have felt something. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. These were people who'd raised me, who'd given me a home, even if it was a hostile one. But all I felt was the cold satisfaction of justice finally arriving. "Do it," I said. "All of it." My grandmother squeezed my hand. "You're certain? Once we start this, there's no going back." I thought of those 4 years in my first life. The struggle, the poverty, the way I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to build something from nothing, while Clarissa coasted on stolen money. I thought of my death, alone and frightened, in a car driven by someone too selfish to consider anyone else's life. "I'm certain," I said. "Arrests happened on Monday morning. I wasn't there. My grandmother had enrolled me at a private school near her New York penthouse, and I spent the day in meetings with academic advisors and private tutors who would help me catch up on the education I'd been denied." But the news spread quickly. Patricia and my father were taken from their home in handcuffs, the scene captured by news cameras that had been tipped off by parties unknown. Definitely not my grandmother's publicist, she would swear under oath. The local news ran the story that evening. Society nurse arrested for $1 million identity theft scheme. The details were salacious. The dead artist's son of fashion royalty, the stolen heiress raised in poverty, the dramatic prom night revelation. It was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Clarissa called my new phone 3 times that first day. I didn't answer. On the 4th call, I picked up. "How could you?" she screamed, not even waiting for me to say hello. "How could you do this to us? We gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," I said calmly. You took everything. There's a difference." "Mom is in jail. Dad is in jail. The house is being seized. I have nothing." "Now you know how I felt," I said. "Every day. For years." "But we're family?" "No," I corrected. "We were never family. You were thieves who happened to live in my house." She made a choking sound, half rage and half tears. "I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone you're lying." "Try it," I said. "My grandmother has the best lawyers in the world, and the truth is on my side. Every document, every transaction, every forged signature. It's all there in black and white." "Vivian. That's not my name, Sa," I said. "My name is Vivian Chen. Learn it. You'll be hearing it a lot." I hung up. She didn't call back. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of change. My grandmother enrolled me at Westfield Academy, the rival school where David attended, where I'd be surrounded by other children of wealthy families and finally receive the education I deserved. She moved me into her penthouse, gave me a wing of rooms that was larger than the entire house I'd grown up in. She bought me a wardrobe, hired tutors, introduced me to her world of fashion and power and casual luxury that still sometimes made me dizzy. But more than that, she gave me space to grieve. Because even though I'd won, even though justice was being served and my life was finally what it should have been, there was still loss. The father who'd failed me was going to prison. The stepsister who'd tormented me was facing her own reckoning. The home I'd known, toxic as it was, no longer existed. "It's okay to be sad," my grandmother said one night, finding me staring out at the New York skyline. "Grief and justice aren't mutually exclusive." "I'm not sad," I said. "I'm just processing. "You've been through something impossible," she said gently. "Something I'm not sure I fully understand. You're not the uncertain, damaged girl I expected to find. You're someone who's already fought battles I can't imagine." I turned to look at her, this elegant woman who was my family, my blood, my future. "I died," I said, and watched her eyes widen. "In another life, I died at 23 in a car accident. And when I woke up, I was 16 again with memories of everything that had been stolen from me. Every humiliation, every theft, every moment of cruelty. And I decided I would never be a victim again." I waited for her to laugh, to call me delusional, to send me to a therapist. Instead, she studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," she said. "Or rather, I believe that you believe it. And I believe that whatever happened to you, trauma, dream, or true rebirth, it gave you the strength to reclaim your life. That's all that matters." She pulled me into an embrace, and for the first time since waking up on my 16th birthday, I cried. Not tears of sadness, but of release, letting go of all the pain and rage and bitterness I'd carried like armor. When I finally pulled away, my grandmother handed me a handkerchief and smiled. "Now, Nixestabam," she said. "Let's talk about your future. You have a scholarship to Parsons and an internship in Hong Kong. But that's just the beginning. What do you want, Vivian? Really want?" I thought about it, about the life I'd lost, the life I'd reclaimed, the possibilities stretching out before me like an infinite road. "I want to design," I said. "Not just clothes, but armor. I want to create things that make people feel powerful and beautiful and invincible. I want to build an empire that no one can take from me." My grandmother's smile was fierce with pride. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." The trial happened 6 months later. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with my grandmother while prosecutors methodically destroyed Patricia's defenses. They brought out the forged documents, the bank records, the paper trail of theft and deception that stretched back nearly 15 years. Patricia's lawyer tried to paint her as a grieving widow who'd made mistakes, a woman who'd taken in a troubled orphan out of the goodness of her heart. The prosecution brought in my maternal grandparents, who testified about their desperate attempts to find me after Patricia moved us and changed our names. They brought in private investigators who'd been blocked at every turn by false documents and dead ends. They brought in handwriting experts who proved the forgeries, financial experts who traced the stolen money. My father testified in his own defense, claiming he'd trusted Patricia, hadn't known the extent of her crimes. The jury didn't believe him. How could they when he'd signed so many documents, authorized so many transfers, benefited so directly from stolen funds? When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and calmly about my childhood, about being made to feel grateful for scraps while my stepsister lived in luxury, about working 3 jobs for a prom dress budget that was given to someone else, about years of systematic neglect and emotional abuse. I didn't mention the rebirth, the future memories, the second chance I'd been given. I didn't need to. The truth of my first life, the life they'd stolen from me, was damning enough. Clarissa sat in the gallery watching her mother's destruction with hollow eyes. She'd aged in 6 months, lost the glossy sheen of privilege and certainty. She was facing her own charges, accessory to fraud, since she'd benefited from the stolen money, even if she hadn't directly participated in the theft. When the verdict came down, I felt only cold satisfaction. Patricia, guilty on all counts, 23 years in federal prison. My father, guilty of accessory to fraud and embezzlement, 12 years. Clarissa, probation and community service since she'd been a minor during most of the fraud and proved convincingly that she'd been kept ignorant of the full scope of her mother's crimes. The civil suit was almost anticlimactic after that. The judge awarded me full restitution, every penny that had been stolen, plus interest, plus punitive damages that brought the total to nearly $5 million. Not that I needed it anymore. My grandmother had already made me an heiress in my own right, with trust funds and investments that would keep me comfortable for life. But it was the principle of the thing. It was justice, tangible and quantifiable. Patricia was led away in handcuffs, and as she passed me, our eyes met. I waited for her to say something, to apologize, to plead, to show some hint of remorse. Instead, she spat at my feet. "You destroyed my family," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "I saved myself from yours." Parsons School of Design was everything I'd dreamed it would be. I threw myself into my studies with the intensity of someone who'd already lost one chance at this life and refused to waste the second. My professors quickly recognized my talent, the intuitive understanding of structure and drape, the bold use of color, the way I could blend traditional techniques with modern innovation. By my second semester, my work was being featured in student exhibitions. By my junior year, I had a small collection shown at New York Fashion Week's Emerging Designer Showcase. The reviews were glowing. "Vivian Chen creates wearable armor," one critic wrote. "Her designs don't just clothe the body, they empower the spirit." There's a ferocity to her work, a sense of phoenix-like transformation that feels both personal and universal. If only they knew how literal that phoenix symbolism was. I graduated top of my class at 21, younger than most of my peers, having skipped a grade and taken summer courses, driven by the memory of wasted time in my first life. My grandmother offered me a position as junior designer at Chen Dynasty Couture, but I had other plans. "I want to start my own label," I told her. "Something separate from the family legacy. Something I build myself." She studied me for a long moment, then smiled. "Your father said something similar when he was your age." "I fought him then, tried to force him into the family mold." Her voice softened with old regret. "I won't make that mistake twice. Build your empire, Vivian. I'll be here when you need me." The launch of Vivian Chen Studio happened on a spring evening in Soho. My first collection, titled Rebirth, featured 30 pieces that told the story of transformation through adversity. Each garment was designed to make the wearer feel invincible, to turn vulnerability into strength. The centerpiece was a modern kipao in crimson and gold, heavily embroidered with phoenix feathers, with a structured bodice and a flowing train. My prom dress, reimagined and perfected with 4 years of additional training. The show was packed. Fashion editors, buyers, celebrities, and 3 rows of seats reserved for family. My grandmother sat in the front row, elegant in black, with tears streaming down her face as the models walked. My maternal grandparents sat beside her, holding hands, watching their granddaughter reclaim everything that had been stolen. And in the second row, I'd reserved one seat, empty, with a placard that read, "Leonardo Chen, Artist and Dreamer." My father might not have lived to see this moment, but I wanted him there anyway. Wanted him to know his daughter had finally come home. The reviews were spectacular. Orders poured in. Within 6 months, I had a wait list of clients and inquiries from major department stores. Within a year, I opened a flagship store in Hong Kong. Within 2 years, I was showing at Paris Fashion Week. I built my empire piece by piece, stitch by stitch, fueled by memories of everything I'd lost and everything I'd reclaimed. Every success was a middle finger to everyone who'd tried to keep me small and worthless and invisible. On my 25th birthday, 2 years past the age I died in my first life, I held a celebration at my grandmother's estate in Hong Kong. The party was attended by fashion royalty, business moguls, celebrities, and artists from around the world. I wore a dress of my own design, black silk embroidered with gold phoenixes rising from red flames, a train that swept behind me like a comet's tail. Near midnight, I stepped out onto the balcony overlooking Hong Kong's glittering skyline. The city sparkled beneath me, full of light and life and infinite possibility. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find David Park, still a close friend after all these years, leaning against the railing beside me. "It is," I agreed him. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "The prom, the beginning of everything?" I smiled. "Every day, it was the night I stopped being a victim and became myself." "You were always yourself," he corrected. "You just finally had the power to show it." Maybe he was right. Maybe the rebirth hadn't given me power so much as reminded me that I'd always had it, buried beneath years of abuse and gaslighting and systematic diminishment. Or maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the only thing that mattered was that I'd won. Inside, the party continued without us. Music drifted through the open doors, along with laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. My grandmother was holding court somewhere, probably telling the story of how she'd found her lost granddaughter. She never tired of that tale. "Have you heard from them?" David asked quietly. "Your stepmother? Your father?" I shook my head. Patricia was 3 years into her sentence, housed in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. My father was 2 years into his, at a different facility in Ohio. Clarissa had served her probation and disappeared. Last I heard, she was working retail in some Midwestern city, using an assumed name to escape her mother's infamy. I'd received one letter from Patricia about a year after the trial. It had been full of rage and blame and vicious accusations. I'd burned it without finishing. I'd received nothing from my father. Perhaps he had nothing to say. "I don't need their apologies," I said. "I don't need their regret or their acknowledgement. I have everything I wanted, everything I built, everything I became despite them." "Revenge," David said softly. "Justice," I corrected. "There's a difference." He smiled. "Is there?" I considered the question. Was what I'd done revenge or justice? Was there a meaningful distinction? Or was I just using prettier words to justify the systematic destruction of people who'd hurt me? Then I thought of that moment in my first life, dying at 23, broken and poor, and still trying to please the people who'd stolen everything from me. I thought of the girl I'd been, desperate for crumbs of affection from people who saw her as nothing more than a convenient victim. That girl deserved justice. She deserved to see her abusers face consequences. She deserved to have her stolen life returned. And I'd given her that. I'd given myself that. "Yes," I said finally. "There's a difference. Revenge is about making someone suffer. Justice is about balancing the scales. They made me suffer for years. I gave them consequences. That's not the same thing." David nodded, accepting my logic even if he didn't entirely agree. "And are you happy?" he asked. "Now that it's over?" Was I happy? I thought about my life now, the success, the wealth, the family I'd reclaimed, the empire I'd built. I thought about waking up every morning in a penthouse overlooking Hong Kong, spending my days creating beautiful things, knowing I was talented and valued and loved. I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life and the woman I'd become in this one. "Yes," I said. "I'm happy. Maybe not every moment, maybe not without shadows, but yes, I'm finally, genuinely happy." And it was true. The rage that had fueled my rebirth had transmuted into something else, not gone, but transformed into drive, into creativity, into the fierce joy of proving everyone wrong. I was Vivian Chen, daughter of Leonardo Chen, granddaughter of Helena Chen. Fashion designer, empire builder, phoenix risen from ashes. I was the girl who'd died at 23 and not had been given a second chance. I was the woman who'd turned that chance into a crown. Inside the party, someone called my name. Time to go back, to accept more congratulations, to bask in the success I'd earned through talent and determination, and yes, through calculated revenge disguised as justice. But I took one more moment on the balcony, looking out at the city that had welcomed me home, thinking about the long, strange journey that had brought me here. In my first life, I'd worn a borrowed dress to prom and felt invisible. In this life, I'd made my own dress and become unforgettable. And that, I thought, made all the difference. I turned and walked back into the party, into the light and the music and the celebration of everything I'd become. Behind me, the Hong Kong skyline glittered like a promise kept. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, Patricia stared at prison walls and probably still believed she'd done nothing wrong. Somewhere in Ohio, my father served his sentence and perhaps finally understood the cost of his cowardice. Somewhere in the Midwest, Clarissa rebuilt a smaller life and maybe, hopefully, learned to value what she had instead of taking from others. And here in Hong Kong, in my grandmother's estate, surrounded by people who loved and valued me, I raised my champagne glass in a silent toast. 2 second chances. Chances to phoenixes rising from ashes, to the girl who'd been invisible and the woman who'd become magnificent, to revenge that looked like justice and tasted like victory, to me. I drank deeply and smiled, and the future stretched out before me like an infinite road paved in gold. I'd won. Not just the battle, but the war. Not just the moment, but the life, and I would never, ever be invisible again.